Good morning, everyone. I hope you're all well. Today, I've done a live recording, just following on from the technical issues I had last week. That was not ideal. I decided it was easier to just pre-record this and upload it, and hopefully I'll have less technology issues. But I will be on Facebook Live replying to any questions that you have. So as you're watching this, do feel free to add your questions to the comments, and I'll get back to you. If there are loads of questions, or if there are some that need a bit more detail, then I might do a live after this video has aired, just because it might be a bit easier. But if not, I'll just be there replying to your questions. Cool, so without further ado, so today we're going to talk about nutrition with regards to sports and exercise. This was the most requested thing to talk about. Obviously, Active and Redbone are all about getting you active, and one part of that is exercising. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. Hopefully last week's kind of background into nutrition will give you a little bit more of a baseline, so hopefully some of this will have a bit more context to it and make a bit more sense. It won't be as long as last week's course. I know there's a lot of information there, so hopefully now we have a good understanding, we can get on to what we're going to talk about. Right, so first thing, we're going to discuss where we get our energy from, then we're going to get into the nitty-gritty and talk about food around pre-exercise, food while you work out, so intra-exercise, post-exercise, and then we're going to talk a little bit about hydration, supplements, and then a few other things to consider. Okay, move that back up there. Okay, so where do we get our energy from? You hopefully will have seen from last week, so there's 3 macronutrients, protein, fats and carbohydrates. You'll see here, so the main ones we get our energy from are fats and carbohydrates, but which one we oxidize, so which one we use as energy, will depend on the intensity level of the exercise. We can actually use protein as energy, but that's not ideal, so we can convert protein into carbohydrates and use that as energy, but obviously, as we kind of learned from last week, protein plays a vital role in lots of different functions, so we want to be using protein for those functions rather than having to convert that into energy. So fats, carbohydrates, where we get most of it from, and yeah, intensity dictates what source we use. So carbs are our main source of energy, so when we're exercising, so anything kind of moderate exercise to high, so if you're walking, it's likely to be probably you'll be oxidizing fats, and anything a little bit more strenuous is going to be from carbs. So yeah, carbs are stored mainly in our muscles, a little bit in our liver and a little bit in our blood as well, and stored as glycogen. We can store around enough glycogen for about 60 to 90 minutes of exercise. So that's stored in our muscles. So yeah, we can kind of go through 60, it tends to be around 90 minutes of exercise before we might then need to replenish it if we're continuing to do exercise. But we'll get on to a little bit more about that later. Right, so pre-training nutrition. Why is it important? So I guess the aim of our nutrition beforehand is to ensure we are adequately fueled for the work ahead. So no matter what that is, it could be a long run, it could be a gym session, a little home workout, a HIIT session, anything. Our aim is to ensure we're adequately fueled for that work, for that demand. And then also we want to make sure we're sufficiently hydrated going into our training. So what happens if we don't do this? Increased fatigue, reduced performance, we could be dehydrated, and also just you could potentially be hungry, which might distract you from the work that you're actually doing. So that is the goal. Right, okay, so if we're looking at resistance training or HIIT or team sports, basically anything that's kind of medium to high intensity, but the main thing here is probably going to be less than under 90 minutes. So as I said, we can store enough glycogen for kind of up to 90 minutes. So yeah, that's a good thing to factor in. So firstly, when should you eat before you exercise? This is definitely person dependent. Some people will find that they can eat like 15 minutes before they train. Some, if it's a larger meal, they might find that it has to be at least an hour, or if it's a bigger meal, even more. So we've kind of got 1 to 4 hours before you train. But often I think people overlook the fact that if they're not hungry, then they probably don't need to eat before they train. If it's only going to be like a 45-minute hour session, if they're not hungry, it probably means that they are sufficiently fueled anyway. but it is massively person dependent. For myself, I tend to find that I generally need a snack before I train, otherwise I burn out halfway through. So I think a big thing with exercise nutrition is it's very, very individualized, it's very personal, and finding what works for you. So it could be trial and error to find what does work for you, and then sticking to it. So yeah, eating, it could be 1 to 4 hours before you train. If you haven't eaten in a while, so if you're training first thing in the morning, like if you're going for a run first thing, and obviously you don't eat anything overnight, so then it could be a good idea to have a snack. And yeah, as I kind of mentioned, some people find it hard to eat too close to training, and some people are absolutely fine with it. So what are we going to be eating? So as I mentioned, carbohydrates are our preferred source of fuel, and we ideally want to get them from 2 different types of sugars. So we have 4 gastrointestinal transporters, and we want to try and be utilising 2 of those things. So glucose and fructose, use 2 of those things, and basically this means we can metabolise them better. We just have a better ability to digest and absorb these carbs, so we can use them quickly and efficiently as fuel. Things to avoid: high fibre foods and high fat foods, just because they can cause some GI discomfort, which is obviously not what we want. So what does that actually look like? There we go, a little bit slow. There we go. Okay, so that could be a bagel and a banana, so we've got our glucose and our fructose, toast and jam, it could be saurine, so the malt loaf, it could be a flapjack, something like that. Or if it's early in the morning, and I know some of my clients can't stomach too much in the morning, dates are a really good source of carbohydrate. And even just if you can have like 1 or 2 dates, they're not particularly hard to eat, they're quite small. Or a banana as well, even just a banana is going to really help you. If you're a little bit more hungry, then adding in a protein source is going to keep you feeling full for that training session. I definitely hate it. I've had it before. If I haven't eaten in a while, I've gone to a training session, halfway through and realised I'm absolutely ravenous. So just having a source of protein in that snack as well with your glucose and fructose. So I've got the example here of Greek yogurt, granola and raisins. Right, moving on to endurance training. So this is more for longer bouts of training. So we're talking 60 to 90 minutes plus. Often this intensity isn't quite as high as if you're doing like a HIIT session or a gym workout, but it's more continuous. So again, when 1 to 4 hours before you train, the same applies. It will vary from person to person. Then we've got the night before or a few days before. So the night before, this could be if you're training early in the morning. I guess the same goes for if you're doing like a shorter bout of exercise. If you really find it hard to eat in the morning, but it's definitely more important for endurance because you've obviously got higher demands. You're going to be training for longer. So eating a high carbohydrate meal the night before is going to sufficiently fuel you for the next day. It's going to you're going to maximize your storage, your glycogen stores in your muscles. And so you'll be ready for your endurance training the next day. If we're going for if we're talking more like a marathon or a really long bike ride, you might have heard of carb bunching or carb loading. So this is when you have carbohydrates a few days before. We don't actually need to. You can sufficiently maximize your glycogen stores within 24 hours, but it probably just means you're going to need to be eating a lot of carbs, like we're talking 600 grams in one day, which is a lot of carbohydrates. So, which is why people carb load in the days leading up to a marathon or something like that. Even a half marathon might be useful to do. And that's also the same as before. What you eat will be more dependent on how long you have between when you're eating and when you're exercising. So closer to exercise, again, prioritize carbs. And then the closer you get to, there's a little typo there, important. That says important. So the closer you get to your training, you want to focus less on protein and fats, again, because fats will just cause some discomfort. And sometimes if you're having protein too close, and you're doing a really long run or a long bike ride, we're talking kind of marathon lengths, or it doesn't have to be quite marathon lengths, but some racking up some miles. If you're having protein, it may just mean that you're too full to eat the carbs, and obviously carbs are what we want to prioritize as energy. So their protein is less important, basically, the closer you get to training. Same again, we want to get our carbohydrates from 2 different types of protein. Avoid high fat and fiber. So I mentioned that you can saturate your glycogen stores within 24 hours, but you're just going to need to eat a lot. And so I've put here, say 10 grams of carbohydrates per kilogram of body weight is the maximum we can store. This is a lot, and if you try to eat that much, it might be that it causes you some discomfort. So ideally, we want to be aiming for 2 to 6 grams of carbohydrates per kilogram of body weight for if you're going for a really long run. If you're doing like a 10K run, you probably wouldn't need to carb load before. I would just suggest habitually eating a quite high carb meal. And if you're someone who does lots of running long distance and cycling long distance, or triathlon, or a combination of any kind of endurance events, just habitually having a high carbohydrate diet can be really beneficial. And it means you don't have to worry about, oh, I need like this amount of carbs before, just because you're likely to be sufficiently stocking up on your glycogen and storing that ready for that training, rather than focusing on like an acute bout of high carbs. But if you're doing like a really long session once a week, then it might be a good idea to either the day before or just take on a few more carbs than you normally would in your normal everyday diet. Okay, so what does this look like? Here is, I've included a little sample of I had one of my clients who was a marathon runner, and I gave her just a little example of what that could look like for breakfast. So I think she was a 63 I think, female. So this is what that could look like. So 2 to 6 grams of carbs in her pre-meal, her pre-run meal. So we've got some pancakes in there, a banana, maple syrup, and some fruit juice. Fruit juice is probably quite an easy way to increase your carbohydrate intake, just because it doesn't fill you up too much. And so yeah, that's quite useful. Another one, we've got some oats there. So porridge is good. It's gonna be packed full of carbohydrates. So intra-training nutrition. So this is again for the endurance training. Make this down. Yeah, so it's unnecessary for exercise under probably 90 minutes. So just your usual gym session or a HIIT session or a 10K run. You probably don't need that. If you're going for a little bit longer, if we're going for kind of half marathon, it might be something that you want to start looking at. So the most important thing here is something that's easy to drink and eat or drink while you're moving, and something that you can like tolerate, and it's not going to cause any discomfort. It's not going to make you feel sick, or I know some people really struggle with gels and they find that really hard and it just makes them feel sick. So finding what you actually can eat, even if it's something really small or not particularly high in carbohydrates, something is going to be better than nothing. But again, we're going back to our carbohydrates, glucose and fructose, low fat and fiber. For all you guys who are experienced or have ever done any kind of endurance training, you may have hit the wall and you find it really hard to carry on. So the aim of inter-training nutrition is to replenish our glycogen stores before we hit that wall. Going back to being able to store enough glycogen for kind of 90 minutes, 60 to 90 minutes. So we want to be taking on that glycogen before those stores run out. So that's going to look like between 45 to 60 minutes. So about 3/4 of an hour in is when you want to start to take on some nutrients. So again, we're prioritizing carbohydrates. How much? 30 to 60 grams of carbohydrates per hour. This will depend on your body size, also just how much you can actually take on board. Obviously, if you're going to be eating a lot, you might find that it kind of weighs you down a little bit and you feel a bit too sluggish. And so, yeah, it's all down to finding what works for you. Trial and error is the way to go here. Right, so what does that actually look like? Click next slide. There we go. Okay, so that could be one sachet, one of the gels every half an hour, so 2 in an hour. as I said, I know a lot of people can't get on with those. They also do, I think, some like chewy kind of sweet versions. So it's not a gel, it's like a chewy version, but it's pretty much the same thing. Or if we're looking at some actual food, saurine bars can be really good, particularly if you're cycling. They can sit in, or even a running belt. They sit really nicely. They're easy to eat. They're already pre-packed. 1 saurine bars and 4 marshmallows is going to be about 36 grams of carbohydrates. So having that in an hour. So next we've got some baby foods in a pouch. Particularly the bananas one is high in carbohydrates. Bananas are generally pretty high in carbs. I think in one banana there's about 20 grams of carbohydrates. So that in itself could be a good one. But these pouches are just quite easy, and again you can store them while you're out and about. And then there's 4 kind of fruit jellies there as well. I think I did some research, and the Sainsbury's own brand one seems to be quite high in carbs, so you get maximum carbs for minimum food, so it doesn't make you feel quite so full. But just something to note with these fruit pouches, it might be good to have if you're going for a marathon, or if you're out training for 3 hours, 2-3 hours. You could potentially have that in one of your hours intakes, but they are likely to be higher in fibre, so having more than one might cause you some GI discomfort. Anything like a flapjack, these Cliff bars are pretty good, 40 grams of carbs in that. They are quite stodgy, so some people find them a bit harder to eat, but if you're kind of having a little nibble every now and then, you might be fine, or you might be fine like anyway. As I said, it's all very personalised. And then the last one is a carbohydrate drink. So this is another really easy way of intaking some carbohydrates rather than eating. You could have it in a little camel pack if you're going for a long cycle or run. Yeah, just another option for you. Recovery nutrition. So why do we do it? It's to promote muscle growth and repair, boost adaptations from your training, refuel, rehydrate, support your immune function, and yeah, poor recovery can lead to injuries and suboptimal performance. So super important. Yeah, I kind of mentioned all these things. Increased fatigue. Yeah. So in our nutrition before our exercise, we are prioritizing carbs. Now we want to prioritize protein. So hopefully from what you learned last week, that is going to help us repair those muscles that have just worked super hard, and it's going to help repair and help them grow. Protein is the main thing. Carbs will replenish the glycogen stores, particularly if you're going to be exercising later that day, or just generally if you have a fairly active job. You want to replenish this glycogen source so you're fueled with energy. It's not massively important because often people will have a normal meal anyway before they exercise, like next time. But if you do some training in the evening and you don't feel like eating like a massive meal before you go to bed, but then you're going to be training first thing in the morning, it would be good to get on some carbs then, yeah. So I'd say if you're not training the next morning, I'd just prioritize protein and maybe just have you can have a protein shake, have some Greek yogurt. So something that's lighter, you might feel a bit more comfortable with if you're not training next morning. But if you are, we want to make sure our muscles are sufficiently refueled and we have enough glycogen to get us through the workout the next day. So getting your protein in and then some carbs as well. I spoke about this myth last week, that protein needs to be consumed within half an hour of eating. That is completely not true. The anabolic window is more like 60 to 120 minutes. So if most people have a meal as they normally would within that time anyway. So again, it might be something that you don't really need to focus on if you're going to have a normal meal, and with your normal meal containing a source of protein as it should, and then potentially some carbs as well. But if you're not going to be, and if you just want a snack, a high protein snack is going to be really good. And then, as I mentioned, habitual carb intake. So just having your normal source of carbs that you would at a normal meal, will replenish those glycogen stores. So what does that look like? Here we go. Right, so tuna, some cottage cheese, that could be good. So we're looking for 25 to 40 grams of protein. Again, it will depend on your body size, essentially. So tuna and cottage cheese is a good one. I mean, tuna mayo is fine. Nothing wrong with that as well. But there's just extra protein in cottage cheese. Something like Eat Lean cheese. I don't know if you've heard of this. Comment below if you've heard of it. I'm a big fan. It's really yummy. It's just a high protein cheese. You can melt it onto some rice cakes, some corn cakes, on some toast, anything like that. The next we have a smoothie. A smoothie is a great one, to be fair, because you can throw in whatever you want, basically. My clients have found it, particularly like the marathon ones who are training for long runs. If they have a meal before they run, they're generally prioritizing carbohydrates, and it might mean that they don't get as many fruits or vegetables in, which is fine for that meal, because then we're just going to get them in later in the day, but just because they can be quite filling, and they want to really try and prioritize those carbohydrates before they run. So having a smoothie after, you can get in some fruits and veg and getting our vitamins and minerals. Also, there's carbohydrates in the fruits. You can put in some oats in there to replenish that. And more importantly, you can also get in some either protein powder or put in some Greek yogurt, which is going to increase the protein content of that. And it will also help hydrate you as well. We've also got some biltong on there and a protein bar. Let's move on. Okay, so hydration. So this is, a nice fact I shared last week as well. 2% drop in hydration can lead to an up to 20% drop in performance, which is huge. So for anyone, even just like the weekend warrior athlete or up to the professionals, the 20% drop in performance is a big old deal. So how much? So it's more, particularly for any kind of exercise, it's really important to go in hydrated. So I generally say between 2 and 4 litres of water a day is going to be ideal. For short bouts of exercise, during your exercise, drink when you're thirsty or when there's a natural break or rest. So if you're doing some strength training or some HIIT training, just having a sip in between, in your rest. The kind of old school of thought was more drink before you're thirsty, so you want to make sure you don't get thirsty. But there's kind of been some more research, and a newer school of thought is more, it's better to, I firstly make sure you go in hydrated, but also just kind of, that doesn't really matter what it is, but so I'd just go with just do drink when you're thirsty, or if there's like a natural break, and just sip. Often people don't feel thirsty even though they are dehydrated, so sometimes listening to your thirst isn't the best way to do it, but again, that's going to be down to you. So for endurance, we are looking at between 5 to 10 milliliters of fluid per kilogram of body weight per hour or per 10k, depending on what you want to look at, and that measure is going to be the same in the 2 hours leading up to your training as well, or your long bout. So as I've said, so you can lose 1 to 2 litres of water in an hour in our sweat, and then we need to replenish this with 1.5 to 2 times this amount in order to rehydrate. So this is quite a lot of liquid. So going back to why smoothies are great. So interestingly, we can't retain water that well. So it's really good to kind of keep our levels hydrated, but in terms of rehydrating, we tend to, if you might notice if you drink like a big glass of water, you're probably going to need to go for a wee like fairly shortly after, and it's because we can't retain that water. So things like having a hydration sachet, so it's going to replenish our electrolytes, which is what helps maintain that fluid balance. So for the more endurance kind or a longer bout of exercise, having something like a Lucozade Sport will contain the added electrolytes, or just adding some salt and adding some sugar to some water, if you don't want to buy the kind of sports drinks, which are fairly expensive, particularly if you're doing it regularly. So so adding some salt, sodium is an electrolyte, and adding some of that to your drink will just help you retain that water a bit better, and is going to help you hydrate a little bit better. And same goes for carbs. We so for 1 gram of carbs, we store 3 to 4 grams of water. So those carbs are going to help us retain that water, which is why smoothies are a great option, because you can, you've got the fruit in there, which is going to help. When you're drinking as you exercise, yeah, I'd go for sips. So try not to down the water again, just because it might likely make you need a wee, but also it may cause some discomfort and you'll feel it jiggling around in your tummy. So just small sips. So a good way to do this is to carry little bottles of water, or if you're going for a long run, like a really long run, potentially going on that route and hiding some water bottles. I know a few people have done that before, like the little 330 millilitres of water, they're quite handy, just so you can sip on those. And then, yeah, it kind of gives you a rough idea of how much you should be drinking. And you're not going to end up downing stuff and drinking too much water, because there is such thing as too much water. Actually, I think there was I think there was a radio competition, and this lady basically ended up downing 7 litres of water, and she basically really sadly died from it. Yeah, because we can't deal with that, and we can't retain that much, and it just sends your body into a bit of a not good. So there is such thing as drinking too much water, and sometimes that does happen. In like marathons, particularly if it's hot, people think they need to be drinking loads and loads, but hopefully this should give you an idea. And again, it will depend on each individual person. It will depend how hot it is outside. I know we've had some really warm days where you'll probably need a little bit more. And it also depends on how sweaty you are of a person, and how much, if you're a salty sweater. I had a client who really noticed that they could taste the salt around their mouth, and they could kind of see it as well. So if you're a salty sweater, it might mean that you need to hydrate a little bit more, and then the electrolytes become even more important. Okay, right. So moving on to supplements, we're getting through this nicely. As I mentioned before, omega-3 fish oils and vitamin D, good for optimal health, but can also benefit you in terms of performance. Creatine, so this is probably the most researched supplement out there. It's really good for power-related exercises, so particularly if you're a gym goer, if you're doing some sprint training or any plyometric training, powerlifting, yeah, this can be really beneficial. The benefits are increased strength, muscle mass, aids recovery, increases your work capacity, increases training tolerance, and there are also some cognitive benefits to it as well, which I find very fascinating. Yeah, so this is something I would really recommend to anyone who's exercising. 3 to 5 milligrams a day. You can do like 2 weeks of loading where you take 20 grams a day to saturate our creatine stores, but yeah, you don't really need to, just 3 to 5 milligrams a day, and then you will saturate your stores. Yeah, so the only thing with creatine to note is if you are a runner, so with creatine, it basically means you'll probably gain a little bit of water weight. So it's not going to be fat or anything like that, but it just might mean that you're 1 kilogram, 2 kilograms heavier, which for most people won't be a problem at all. But if you're really focusing on your running, that could have an effect. But I think generally the benefits will, and some people might not experience that at all. But in general, I think the benefits probably outweigh that. Caffeine is another one, particularly for endurance training. The research is really there for the benefits of caffeine. So it stimulates our CNS, our central nervous system, it boosts our alertness and our energy levels. Dosage between 200 to 400 milligrams taken an hour before training. 200 milligrams, well, 400 is actually like a large amount of caffeine. 200 milligrams is probably 2 espressos. So you can take it in coffee, or you can get little tablets. I know some people find coffee, particularly when they run, causes them some GI discomfort. So that's something to factor into it. But potentially the capsules, just little tablets of caffeine, yeah, they might be better for you if you're someone who experiences tummy problems with caffeine, with coffee. Also just note, so I mentioned this before, on how caffeine massively affects our sleep. So it has a half-life of 4 to 6 hours. So generally try and limit your intake after 12 p.m. So basically it can just half of your, so say you were training at 3 and you have some caffeine at 2, you can still have half that caffeine in your system by the time you go to bed. So just another thing to think about. Right, other things. So we can have the best optimal nutrition ever, but it's kind of made slightly redundant if our sleep and our rest strategy isn't being looked at. So if we're getting minimal sleep, poor quality, we're not going to make those training adaptations, and no matter how brilliant your nutrition strategy is, you're not going to be reaping the benefits because you're neglecting your sleep, your rest, and stress levels as well. So anyone who's looking for muscle gain, meal frequency becomes a little bit more important, and our protein intake will generally be increased to up to 2.4 grams per kilogram of body weight. A note on weight loss and performance. Sadly, an energy deficit is not ideal for performance. So if you go back to last week's talk where we looked at energy balance, being in an energy deficit, so consuming less calories than we're expending, is not optimal for performance, because ultimately we need that energy to get us to perform well in our exercise. But that doesn't mean that you can't see results, and if you still want to be training with while you're trying to lose weight, that's great. Exercise can be beneficial for weight loss. Again, looking at last week's, exercise does only equate to 5% of your total daily energy expenditure, so just make sure you're not putting too much emphasis on that. But yeah, you still can see results in both weight loss and performance. You can still perform well, but it might just mean you might need to periodize your carbs, so really manipulating your carbs around your training to get the most from your sessions. Okay, so moving on to just a last note on performance nutrition. So we've kind of talked about nutrition around sports and exercise. Performance nutrition kind of takes us to the next step, and involves exercise, nutrition, sleep, recovery, and mindset. And here we have a pyramid of things that are most important when it comes to performance nutrition. And so this is just something that you can look at if you really do want to take your performance to the next level. Everything we've kind of discussed is great if you're just kind of a recreational athlete, or just happy to just to get it done just because you enjoy it. But if you really want to be focusing on performance, there's a few other things that you need to consider. And yeah, I think I say on the next slide. So if you do want to, I do performance nutrition consultation, so do feel free to get in touch, and we can discuss a nutrition strategy which kind of encompasses a lot more than what we've talked about today. I love performance nutrition. It's great. Okay, I think that kind of sums everything up. I hope that has been interesting. Do comment any questions. Also, go and comment if you have any ideas for any pre or post-training snacks. Let me know what your favourite pre-training snack is. Mine at the moment, I love rice cakes with apricot jam. Apricot jam is my favourite at the moment. I find that, it's really good. If I ever have it in the morning, it's not too heavy. If I'm training like early in the morning, it's easy to do, and it doesn't fill me up too much, and it doesn't make me feel queasy or anything like that. And my favourite post-training snack, if I'm talking about a snack, I'm not going to have a meal, Greek yogurt with either I put some protein powder in, or I put some kind of flavour drops in, with frozen blueberries. That's probably my favourite, and then sometimes I put some cereal on top to get it a little bit more texture. And I also make a really nice chocolate protein mug cake as well. Those are my favourite snacks. So comment below what yours are. It would be really nice to share some other ideas. I'm sure people will find that really beneficial. I hope this has been good. Let me know if you have any comments or questions, and I will see you next week to talk about emotional eating and mindful eating. Cool, have a good week. Bye.